I think that if we study Stoicism, we can at least learn three things. One of them is that they can teach us how to reflect about our beliefs, our emotions, and our actions. I think that they can also help us challenge our assumptions about or our perspective regarding moral responsibility, freedom, and what exactly is valuable in the world. So why we find certain things valuable and why we don't find others valuable. And finally, I think that they can help us think about what constitutes a fulfilled, flourishing, happy life. And we might not agree with them about that, but by listening to what they say about it, I hope that can kind of trigger some thinking in us. And also on the side about whether that happiness, that fulfilled life, that meaning that we crave is within our reach or not, or to what extent, and at what cost. So what exactly are we gonna accept or not, and what position we have to take to say that we can achieve these goals. Now, let me begin with what I think is the problem that the Stoics can help us solve. Because these guys and some gals lived very, very long time ago. So you might think, well, why these ancient people can't help us today? Well, think about the following example. So imagine one of your family members falls ill, and then you kind of take that person to the hospital, your friend or your partner or something like that, and something bad happens, some negligence or something, and your loved one dies. And you feel angry, you feel fear, you feel all sorts of emotions, you really want to do something about it. You say some bitter, horrible things to the medical personnel. Then you try to file a lawsuit. It goes nowhere. So that kind of again leaves you feeling angry and all sorts of negative feelings. At the end, you decide to take some revenge or something, and you plan and you plot. And you feel every day more and more anger, more and more of these bad emotions. Then at some point you start feeling fear that what you have been planning is not gonna pan out, and it's gonna be a disaster, or it's gonna just humiliate you, and you're gonna end up in jail or whatever. So you hesitate, you don't know what to do. At the end, nothing of those actions, nothing of those days spending in plotting have done nothing to make peace with what happened. And even when we are not in such a dramatic situation, even in our everyday life, we go through our days feeling all sorts of frustration, fear, hesitation, and anger, sometimes justified or what seems to be justified, and sometimes very minor things can make us feel very bad. Now, most of us still live the unfulfilled and miserable life of fools. And we constantly endure unfulfilled desires when we cannot see our friends, when we don't get the recognition we crave, when we don't get the pay we think we deserve, or like for all sorts of these reasons, we go through our lives suffering. And the Stoic diagnosis will be that we are not really free, that all those emotions, in fact, enslave us. They control us, they take over, and we are just responding to them in all sorts of ways, but those emotions are the ones that are in control of our lives. And for that, they say, we are not free. Now, they also say that we are ignorant, that we don't really know what we are doing, and that's part of the problem. And and this, of course, leads to the next one, which is we are not happy, and that's clear because of all these emotions going on. And the important part is that no matter how much money we have, no matter how much technology we have developed, how we can access certain types of knowledge just with our phone. We can Google like factual knowledge, propositional knowledge, but that often helps us very little or not at all. So we are not happy, and worst of all, most of the time, we don't know what to do about it. So we are basically in a terrible situation. Now, the Stoics claim, and let's see if we should or not believe them, but they claim that they can help us. Now, let me just briefly tell you a little bit about who they are. So the Stoics are a school of philosophy that started in Greece, in ancient Greece, like around 300 before Christ. And they were founded by a guy called Zeno of Citium. And what they did was to just hang around this area, a portic, which it's called in Greek Stoa. And Stoa Poikile is a specific place in Athens, which this just means the painted porch. And this is a reconstruction, and the other one is the remains of what it was. But it's a public space, and they will just hang out there and discuss previous philosophers, philosophical puzzles between themselves, with the people that were coming and going. And they developed certain style, certain way of thinking, but they were open to everybody. Now, these are some of the names of famous Stoics. So Zeno is the founder, then Cleanthes was the head of the school when Zeno died. After that was Chrysippus, and then Diogenes of Babylon, Panaetius, Posidonius were Stoics that brought Stoicism to Rome. And then, like the second row of thinkers are Roman Stoics. Now, the thing is that all we have from the very early stages is fragments, and so we struggle to reconstruct what exactly they thought. But from Roman Stoics, we do have like complete works. And we have complete works of three philosophers. Those are Seneca the Younger, who has some very useful, very powerful material. Then we have the works of Arrian, who basically wrote down the teachings of Epictetus. So when if you saw in a library the works by Epictetus, well, it's not Epictetus himself, it's Arrian who wrote down the lectures from Epictetus. And then we have the meditations from the Emperor Marcus Aurelius. And those are the only sources of works that are in full from the Stoics. Now, the important part is, so what exactly is that the Stoics are going to tell us? And I guess what has the power of Stoicism, what makes them so famous, and what makes them come again and again in the history of philosophy, because after the ancient Greeks, they faded away, but every now and then there is a revival of Stoicism, and some people will say that right now we are going through a revival of Stoicism in popular culture. Now, what exactly is it that makes them so alluring? Well, they make a promise that sounds too good not to at least glance over or ignore. And I'm going to break it into two parts. So one of those parts is that the Stoics say that if you learn Stoic philosophy, you will never fail to get what you desire. Now imagine that. Imagine that whatever you desire, you're gonna get it. There is no unfulfilled desire if you follow this path, according to them, okay? The second promise that they make is you will experience genuine freedom, knowledge, and happiness. So what else you would need if you get all that? Now, they will say, well, there is no like genie or anything, there is no magic. All is through understanding our place in the world, in the cosmos, understanding human nature, understanding what exactly is the role of reason in our lives. Now, as you might imagine, or this of course might sound too good to be true, and in a way there is a catch. And I'm going to also divide it in two. So the first one is that the Stoics turn the problem of dissatisfaction and fulfillment of desire on its head. So instead of giving us the knowledge or skills to acquire the petty desires that we currently have, what they say is that we should align our desires to what we can achieve, to what is in our control, and we have to train to align that. So it's not that it's not like in the movie. It's not that they can kind of make us rich or do any fantastic change in our lives. It's more about understanding that we shouldn't desire what is not in our control. Now, the second catch is that they reverse the direction of evaluations of moral responsibility. So what I mean by that is to say that when we are thinking about, oh, something happened to me, and I think it's something bad happened to me, and we normally, for example, when someone tries to harm us, we say like, oh, I'm the victim, and this is the person who is evil and is trying to harm me. Well, the Stoics are going to analyze the situation in a different way, and they are going to kind of turn the direction of that and say that, and I'm going to explain that in a second a little bit more fully, but what they say is, look, the only person that can harm you, the only person that is going to do any evil to you is yourself. Like no one else can harm you but yourself. So the direction is whatever you do, you either benefit you or you harm you, but from no harm comes from outside. And that's very weird. That's something that will change our perspective in some ways. And this is something that we really have to analyze whether we should accept or not. Now, so they say, who is to blame? You are always to blame. Now, here we can place many objections. I'm gonna go with this one. Our desires do not seem to be under our control. If I look at some French confections of macarons, I understand that I can decide not to take them because perhaps I have some reasons. I mean, they are not very healthy, or I'm gaining weight, so I shouldn't, or whatever. I can resist my desire, but I can say that, well, I can restrain from action, but I'm not gonna be able to extinguish my desire. My desire is gonna still be there, bugging me and making me mad and frustrating me, and my level of frustration and unhappiness is still there. So that's kind of the objection. Like the Stoics are wrong. We cannot really control our desires in the way they seem to require for their promise. Now, the Stoics have an answer to this, and I'm gonna hopefully go through some of the details of that. But if you have any question, let me know, and I'll go back to this. So what happens is that the Stoics have a very complex way of analyzing our mental life, our desires. And one of the things they distinguish, and this goes back to the previous lecture, so they like to make distinctions. And one of those is that they say, look, one thing is what they call practical impressions. Now that's just a technical term, but what they mean is that when we're going through our lives, when we are walking around, sometimes we get the impression that we should do or avoid certain things. And those impressions that come up in our minds are involuntary. We don't decide to have them. They just occur to us. And those are these impressions. For example, and they kind of construe them as, oh, it seems beneficial or good to do this or to avoid that. So one example is I'm walking on the street, I see a homeless person, and I have the impression that I should check if I have some change on me and give it to that person, because that seems, my impression tells me that that's the correct, good thing to do. Now, the Stoics, what they are going to say is that apart from the impression, we can assent or not to those impressions. We have that power. So what I don't have is the power for those impressions to arise or not. So, but once they arise, I have the power to say, like, wait a minute, should I assent to this impression or not? And when I assent to that impression, then the Stoics think that leads to action. So once I assent, then I have the impulse to do the action recommended by the impression. If I don't assent, and I say like, oh, this is just like an apparent good, but it's not, it's incorrect. Sometimes, for example, I mean, some people will say like, well, yeah, of course I feel pity for this person in this situation, but I know that there are better ways, or I don't know, like people will rationalize many ways out of certain situations, right? So people might have an argument against certain impressions, and then some reasons to reject that impression. Now, the Stoics are going to talk about this in this way. They distinguish desires and they talk about what they call wishes, appetites, and selections. Now, wishes are desires that follow the mandates of reason, of an argument, of a reasoned kind of situation. Then appetites are those when our desires don't listen to reason and they just go for it, and we kind of rush our assent to certain impressions. And selections, well, this is of course like a bad translation, and it sounds very weird, but they use that to mean that when we decide things that are morally irrelevant or that are not really important for our moral development. For example, if I have to decide between, initially I was going to say a hamburger and a hot dog, but then some people will construe that as a moral decision. So let's say, like, okay, so I'm in front of two vegan meals. Which one I decide is morally irrelevant, right? I have, if I have rice or if I have carrots or whatever, that's not going to be morally relevant. But still, I have to take a decision. So, and I might have some reasons for that. But it's just to explain my preferences given a circumstance or a situation, but it's not going to be morally relevant. And those are selections. Now, the Stoics think that it's impossible to assent to an impression and have an impulse towards something else. So they think that once you accept the impression, you are necessarily going to act following that impression. Now, there are some ways, some counter examples or whatever. So sometimes you assent to an impression and you do not act accordingly, but that's just because someone is in your way or something like that. But if there is no impediment, you're going to act in following that impression. And the Stoics think that if you have accepted that impression, there is no way you can do something else. And this is going to be important because many times we say, well, of course I should be fighting for human rights or for climate change or for changing this or that, but I don't have time, or I'm very busy, I'm very tired, or my will is weak. I'm not strong enough. I know I know the correct thing to do, but I don't have the strength to do it. That's how sometimes we think and justify our way of life. Well, the Stoics will say, well, in our analysis, if you are not acting, then you're not really assenting to the impression. You might have the impression, but you're not really assenting to that. So it's a very harsh diagnosis there, that they are going to say you don't really believe what you're saying in those cases. Now, we can try to react to that Stoic diagnosis and say, like, wait a minute. There are cases where this seems to happen. There are cases where I seem to have knowledge and then of what is the correct thing to do, and then I act against that. And the example I always think is smoking. So I was a smoker for many years, a long time ago, but I was a smoker, and during those years I was aware that smoking causes cancer. Like, I mean, no one is not aware of that, right? So I was aware of that. I was aware that it's not good to smoke, that it's bad, and every morning I was still doing it, as probably all smokers do. So that is a counterexample that someone could kind of throw at the Stoics and say, like, wait a minute, this is a case where we have knowledge, but we are not doing the right thing. Now, the Stoics are going to retort to that with an analysis of what is going on, that it's going to explain things a little differently. So instead of appealing to the weakness of the will or conflicting motivations or something like that, what they argue is that our reason vacillates between two beliefs. So the way they will analyze the smoking example is, or any bad action that you do when you seem to know what is going on, is that your reason vacillates. And that happens because you don't have full knowledge of the situation. You have just two beliefs. And one of them is, cancer is bad. But then you also have this belief that one cigarette is not going to cause me cancer or something like that, right? And sometimes you just vacillate between those without understanding that perhaps they are not compatible, or without really understanding the situation, and perhaps they are compatible, but given that you are using the belief of one cigarette like 20 times a day or for 20 years or whatever, then that doesn't work anymore. Now, what they are going to recommend is to, they are going to say that we need a rational and careful exam of our practical impressions before assenting to them. So we have to be very careful before assenting to our impressions, and we have to take our time to consider the situation and see whether we should accept them or not. So instead of jumping into the conclusion, once we have an impression about something that we should or should not do, we should kind of stop ourselves before jumping to action and say, like, okay, let's analyze this situation from all the aspects, from all the sides, and see if I really should accept or not this. Now, what happens is that, and this has to do with the emotions, is that many times, many of us, what happens is that we assent to our impressions without proper consideration. And that leads to what they call emotions. Now, they say that an emotion is an impulse which is excessive and disobedient to reason. Or in some other text, it's just like an impulse that is not listening to reason. In that way, they are disobedient. So we rush to action, and we are kind of overpowered emotionally by our impressions, and we accept them, but we shouldn't have done that. And they then explain that doing that leaves us in a way prey to all sorts of emotional distress. Now, what happens is that the problem with emotion is that they are too intense. So once you accept them without proper consideration, they become very powerful, and then you cannot go back. The way they explain this, and there are many examples of this, but one of those is an analogy that Chrysippus gives about between walking and running. And he says, look, when we walk, we give impulse to our legs, and when our minds decides to turn, we can immediately turn and walk in a different direction. And so our body listens to us obediently and immediately. However, when we run, and when we run fast, when our mind tells our body to turn direction, there is some impulse that is so strong that we're not going to be able to immediately turn. And what is going to happen is that we're going to fall. And that is the way they see emotions, that sometimes we assent to certain things, but it's going to be so strong that even when we later kind of regret what we are doing, we cannot stop ourselves. And this happens, for example, when we get angry, or when some people get angry, and they start saying or doing things, and perhaps some of you have had this situation that you are already saying things and realizing like, oh, I shouldn't be saying this. I shouldn't be kind of banging on the table or whatever, but I'm already doing it and I cannot stop myself. That's what the Stoic analysis of emotion is. They say that's what happens, and that's why it's something that we should avoid. Now, the Stoics are very famous for saying that we should completely avoid any emotion. Now, the thing is that they describe emotion in this way, as impulses that are disobedient to reason. And if you define the terms in that way, of course we should get rid of that, at least to a certain extent. Now, notice two things. One is that in the Stoic analysis, and this is different from other types of analysis, in the Stoic analysis, having a horrible impression is not morally wrong. So perhaps I'm in the queue for getting my train ticket or something, and someone jumps the line, and I think to myself, oh, this is unacceptable. I'm going to throw my coffee at this person, or I'm going to make a scene or something. And then I stop myself and say, like, well, that's an impression that I shouldn't assent to, right? And I don't do nothing. The Stoics would be completely fine with that. And that would be like a completely moral behavior from my part. There is no blame there, no nothing. The other thing is that so someone might think like, well, but what happens when you get blush or jump when someone scares you or something? And they will say, no, look, these are involuntary reactions that everybody has, and they are morally irrelevant. So there is no shame in those reactions. There is no moral component to those. Because you cannot have control of those things. And the last thing to say about this is that the Stoics, despite what many people think, they do allow emotions. It's just that they kind of restrict them to certain good emotions. And the Stoics, for example, will say, well, the desires that you can have are called wishes because they are obedient to reason. Instead of fear, you can be cautious. And instead of pleasure, you can experience joy. And these are kind of moderated versions of the bad emotions, the emotions that are disobedient to reason. Now, in terms of the moral responsibility and virtue, what they say is that for them, and this is perhaps the crucial point in their ethics, is that virtue is the most important thing, and not only that, is the only valuable thing. There is nothing of value beyond becoming a good, virtuous person. Now, and from that follows that any action not connected to virtue is indifferent, doesn't matter morally. Now, it can matter practically, it can matter for many other reasons, but not morally. Now, what appears to be an injustice or harm, or some harm that someone has committed against you, is in reality morally indifferent. So, and this, I hope you can understand the gravity of this step. So, if someone tries to torture you, if someone tries to kidnap you or kidnap your loved ones or do all, like any type of evil to you, for the Stoic, that is morally irrelevant. It has no relevance. Why? Because that is not relevant for the development of your virtue, which is the only thing that should concern you. The only evil and the only injustice we suffer is the one we commit to ourselves. So when we do something wrong, we are harming ourselves. And that is what we should avoid. Now, an objection here is, of course, actions can harm the agent that is doing the bad thing, but it seems that they can also affect the recipient of the action, because sometimes many actions will impede the development of of virtue of those persons. And here I guess the counter example is when we do something that will harm the possibility, for example, of for children to develop into fully flourishing adults. And that seems to put some pressure on the Stoic agenda. So, and I'm kind of sneaking objections against the Stoicism because I hope that you don't buy the whole thing. Now, the Stoics think about philosophy in analogy with medicine, and think that philosophy can be a kind of therapy, and that, I mean, nowadays many philosophers will argue for the argument's sake and for the kind of sport of giving and receiving arguments, but for the Stoics, all that has to be done in service of becoming a better human being. And if you don't do that, then you're kind of wasting your time. Now, how can we do that? How can we use philosophy and Stoic philosophy to become better, to become more virtuous? Now, the way they are going to try to explain this is the following. So, they say that we should learn to substitute emotions to selections. And I'm going to go slowly with this so we can understand what they mean. So the example I often give is that when I go out every morning, I have the clear impression that I should get a coffee. And because that seems good to me. It's very, very good to me. But the Stoics will tell me, look, keep in mind that when you desire something, that presumes that you can get what you desire. And or that if you have an aversion to something, that presumes that you can avoid it. And if you don't, and if you can't, then that's going to lead to a miserable existence. Now, what does that have to do with me getting coffee every day? It's so easy, and I mean, it doesn't affect my finances or whatever. Well, they will say, sure, for now, but what's going to happen when you get ill? Or when your finances turn and leave you with nothing, well, you are not going to be able to get your coffee. And given that you consider that part of the good life, that something good that happens to you and that you get, when you are not able to get it anymore, that's going to affect your happiness, and it's going to frustrate you. So what should we do? We should change from an emotional reaction, so from conceiving getting the coffee as something good, to saying it would be appropriate to get a flat white. And now that, I know, sounds just like a change of word, but what it means is that so when you consider it just appropriate, for the Stoics, it means that you understand that it's not contributing to your moral development, that it's not part of the good life, that it's something preferable if it's within your reach, but you should be ready at any moment to leave it and be able to live a happy life without it. And unless you understand that, you are not in this second state, you are in the first one. And then they go one step further and say, and you should add something like this, so it would be appropriate for me to get this thing that I perceive as something appropriate, unless there is some impediment to it. So I should understand that sometimes I cannot get what is appropriate for me because there are things outside of my control that are going to impede that. This is, for example, going to be helpful to when we make promises. So when we make a promise and Trasa, let's meet tomorrow for lunch, and then something happens and I can't be there. So the normal reaction is like, even if it wasn't in my control, I tend to feel like, oh, I'm so guilty that I'm kind of letting her down and whatnot. For the Stoics, they are going to say like, no, because you made, you assented to the impression that it was appropriate for you to have a lunch with your colleague, unless there was something outside of your control that impeded that. And once you understand that, you're not going to feel guilty or ashamed anymore. You're going to explain things to your colleague, and that's going to be it. Now, they also offer some more training. And for example, they are very strong advocates of setting reminders. Now, these reminders are aiming at making us more mindful and resilient. Some of the reminders are like this. So they tell us, like, imagine that you are an actor in a play, that you didn't choose the role in life that you got. But what is in your control is to put the best performance that you can. And that's the only thing that should concern you. And that kind of reminder will be helpful, according to the Stoics, for you to kind of help your desires align with what is in your control. Now, some other way of dealing with this is, so Seneca, for example, has two different types of training. One is to resist an emotion, and the other one is like once you have or once you recognize that you are prone to certain emotions. So to resist our emotions, we should work on understanding the nature of those emotions and understanding that they are not helpful. Knowing the history of those emotions and all the bad things that can happen if you fall prey of those emotions, and practicing strategies to delay the ascent, because that's probably the most difficult part. When we are in certain situations, we ascend too quickly, and that's the problem. Now, to contain our emotions, they say, like, now, and this differs this differs for every one of us, because we are prone to different emotions. Some of us are prone to anger, others are prone to fear, and every one of us should plan a life that takes that into consideration and kind of puts some strategies in place so that we don't fall into that situation. For example, they say that we should postpone vengeance. So imagine that I already assented to an impression that I should seek vengeance, right? Like I was, I don't know, someone offended me, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna do something about it. Well, they say, like, well, okay, if you already are in that frame of mind, at least try to postpone your vengeance. And in that way, that will give you kind of a time to calm down and say, no, I shouldn't have assented to that impression, and then avoid some of the actions that you would otherwise have taken. Now, another one is to revoke the powers you have to others, and just say, look, I'm very prone to this emotion, so when I'm in this kind of state, I'm gonna relinquish my powers. If I'm like at work or in my family role or whatever, in the family, I'm just gonna go to the room and take 5 or whatever. They also say that we should try to use our body to make our emotions a little bit more stable. And that is by relaxing our expression, by walking slowly and breathing and that kind of thing. And finally, they say, well, tell your friends, like, okay, so I'm very prone to this emotion or that emotion. If you ever see me doing this, feel free to admonish me, because then I'm gonna remember that I shouldn't be assenting to those impressions so quickly. So that's a very brief, very condensed introduction to how, some ways the Stoics can give us some food for thought. Some of the books you might find in the libraries about Stoicism will try to tell you, oh, you should become a Stoic, and let's all be Stoics, and I think that is very dangerous. So I think that one of the ways, one of the lessons from this is to say, look, the Stoic material is very interesting, they have some very powerful insights, but if you look closely, there are some other bits that might look very problematic, and you shouldn't just kind of adopt this identity and then kind of eat it all. It's more like, oh, you should engage very critically with this, because it's going to help you think about how you should lead your life. Remember, these guys lived very long time ago. They start from a very different place than us, but hopefully I have also shown that they have some interesting things to say about very crucial, important topics. So just for you, the question is, should we drink Stoic medicine, and how we should approach this material? Thank you very much, and let me know if you have any questions.